This is Gesher, the podcast that's bridging the gap between the Jewish and evangelical Christian communities with conversations that matter. Here's your host, Ty Perry, with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Gesher. Last week, the world learned of the barbarous murder of a young couple about to be engaged, Yaron and Sarah Lynn Milgram, two staffers at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. The terrorist who murdered these people was homegrown, a radical leftist who shouted "Free, Free Palestine" as he was being taken into custody outside of the Capitol Jewish Museum, where he murdered Lishinsky and Milgram. The attack was the logical outcome of the anti-Semitic calls to globalize the Intifada that we've heard coming from American streets and campuses since October 7th, 2023. Understandably, news of the attack sent shockwaves throughout the American Jewish community. But one columnist at Harbinger's Daily recently warned the murder of Yaron Lishinsky and Sarah Lynn Milgram should be a wake-up call to the church as well. And that's what we're talking about on this episode of the podcast. I'm honored to have the columnist of that article and my friend and colleague at the Friends of Israel, Chris Katulka, on the show today. Chris, welcome.
Ty, thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, Chris, first of all, I love this article. You let me look at it just before you submitted it, so I felt honored to do that. And I'm seeing that it's getting a lot of traction in the Christian community right now. I want to begin, first of all, by sharing the title of this, and I invite readers or listeners to go read this on the Harbinger's Daily website. It's "The Shocking Killings of Yaron and Sarah Must Be a Wake-Up Call to the Church." So I want to start with this. Why did you write this when you did? You know, there have been attacks on the Jewish community throughout the last couple of years. Why now?
Great question. And what hit me was there was a lot coming out the moment that Yaron and Sarah were killed. That it happened in the evening, and by the next day it had made international news. And a lot of people were already commenting on social media. And I was sitting there reading everything, and something hit me, especially when I found out that they were Jewish believers. That means that they were followers of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And what hit me was, this isn't, a lot of times we talk in the realm of anti-Semitism. That's an attack against the Jewish people. And as Friends of Israel, you and I know, we spend every waking hour fighting anti-Semitism from a biblical perspective. But this one hit a little bit differently because not only is it anti-Semitism, it's also our very own that were killed, Christians, those who love the Lord Jesus. And to me, it was kind of a moment where the church should always be standing up against anti-Semitism. But I kind of wanted to use this as a moment to show the church that, look, there's a point where these things, these moments begin to connect with one another. This isn't an isolated Jewish incident where we're praying for the Jewish community. As a church, we should be as angry about what happened in Washington, D.C., as the Jewish people have been upset and frustrated and angry about the anti-Semitism that's been on the rise since October 7th. So I wanted to use this as a moment where this intersection has taken place to make sure that the church knows the importance of standing against anti-Semitism and also seeing where these moments begin to collide with one another. And really, we always say the Jewish people, that they're the canary in the coal mine. And so I want to make sure that we use this moment for the sake of biblically standing up and supporting Israel and the Jewish people, because we lost one of our own, or two of our own as well, Yaron and Sarah.
Yeah, I like you use the term there, intersection. And when you think about the Jewish community being persecuted, certainly we at the Friends of Israel and other Christian Zionist Friends of the Jewish people, we mourn that when those attacks happen. And we've been warning believers that it doesn't stop with the Jewish people. It never does. We are next. And so to have this intersection or this crossroad where they're Jewish people who are believers in Jesus, it really signals something that's shifted in terms of the level of anti-Semitism and the hatred against Israel. You wrote something here. I want to just read this. in your article, you say, in their deaths, we witness a powerful intersection, as you just said, between the Jewish and Christian communities, a moment that reveals just how deeply connected our stories truly are. These two Jewish believers in Jesus were killed for the hope of Israel, Acts 28:20, the very phrase the Apostle Paul used to describe the unbreakable link between his faith in the Messiah and God's promises to his people. You and I we both travel around the country, we meet believers, and it does seem that many Christians don't always grasp that in that inseparable link that exists between what we believe about Jesus as the Messiah and what we believe about Israel as the chosen nation in the land. Talk a little bit about that link. Why is that so important? And in your opinion, why do believers miss that so often?
Well, it's a great question as well. When you're thinking about Israel and the Jewish people, number one, I always like to remind people, and you've probably mentioned this on the Gesher podcast a billion times, but the Bible is a Jewish book. And, even the Apostle Paul goes at great length to communicate to the church that we have been grafted in to this plot line that God has for Israel and the Jewish people. See, oftentimes I think there's this thought process in the church that Israel failed completely. God needed to raise up a new group of people because these people just absolutely are abysmal. They're the black sheep of the family. Get them out of here, move on, and let's focus on this this entity, the church. And that is not what happened at all. God did not completely abandon. He did not abandon his people. In fact, the Apostle Paul is going at great lengths to try to argue in Romans chapter 11 that it might seem like things aren't working out the way that the prophets had anticipated in the Old Testament, but that doesn't mean that God's plan for his people are done with. God didn't fail. I think that was the big thing that the Apostle Paul was trying to get at, is God didn't fail. In fact, it tells us how we as the church should be interacting with the Jewish people. He says, but if some of the branches, which are those, the Jewish people that have not believed, if some of the branches were broken off and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. I take that as a warning from the Apostle Paul about how the church, and notice the branches are not branches that are connected to the tree. They're actually the ones that were broken off. He's talking about those branches that were broken off. And, we can easily look at the tree or the Israel and the Jewish people and say, see, they're just their own people. They're out there on their own. And look what they're doing. They didn't trust in God, or we don't like anti-Semitism, but what are we going to do about it? Here the Apostle Paul is saying, don't you be arrogant against those branches, because he says, if you are, remember, it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Well, who's the root? That's the question. Yeah. Well, that means that we who have been grafted into this olive tree are supported by the root. Well, what's the root system? It's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's and right. What is that? That's the Old Testament. That's the promises that God made to Israel and the Jewish people. And then what does Paul go on to show later on in Romans chapter 11? God's not through with his people. One day, all Israel will be saved. If you want to see what ultimate glorification and hope looks like for the church today, it says, just you wait until Israel believes in their Messiah. Then you'll see it happen. So we have such great hope in what the Lord will do in the future. But oftentimes, I don't think the church recognizes, number one, we're built on the foundation of the promises that God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then number two, the completion of our hope is when Israel actually comes and repents and turns to Jesus, their Messiah. That's exactly what the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 11, verses 13, 14, and 15. And so that to me is the crux. It's the moment where there's that link. And no, I don't think that most Christians think about that, because the church has done a disservice over the years to push Jewish culture, Jewish identity out of the church, especially in the early church, and to kind of really, in many ways, abandoned the Jewish people. And from that came this uprising of anti-Semitism that came from the church itself. So again, I think a lot of times it's called the parting of the ways. And so there's a parting of ways that happened to the point now where Israel almost seems like this, or the Jewish people seem like this distant thing,
Yeah.
when really we're grafted into the plot line of God's plan for Israel and the Jewish people.
Absolutely. And, I think our friend, Dr. Michael Vlach at Shepherd's Theological Seminary, he makes the distinction in this replacement theology, or supersessionism is what you're talking about, where the church has taught that God is done with Israel, done with the Jewish people, that in the old days of the church, we're talking centuries ago, it was kind of this punitive supersessionism where God's punishing the Jewish people because of their rejection of Jesus. And now the church doesn't usually believe that as much as it does we don't teach about Israel. It's not even part of our curriculum when we teach the Word of God. And so he calls it structural. It's this almost inadvertent skipping over Israel. And to your point, we miss all of this rich background of the text that we say we love so much, and we do. We're missing that.
Can I add to that? You can really see it come into play when you have an honest conversation, which I love this. When you have an honest conversation with somebody who's a believer in Jesus, a Christian, and you say, yeah, this Jewish person became a believer in Jesus, and you can see their head spinning going, how is that possible? Like they go, so they converted to Christianity, and you go, well, I mean, they believe that their Messiah, Jesus, is their Messiah. See, Jesus is Jewish. It's their Messiah. Yeah, but did they convert? Sure, they consider themselves a part of the church now. Yeah, but so they've abandoned all of those, it's hard. And that's just how far apart the church has gone from its roots, that people are going, they can't even, you can see the wires crossing and synapsing in their brain.
Yeah.
And it's nothing wrong, but I get it, because they think that there's this abandoning of the Jewishness of who the Jewish people are in order to follow Jesus, when really to follow Yeshua, Jesus, the Messiah, is to bring about the completion of who they are intended to be in many ways. So anyway, I always think it's interesting whenever you talk to somebody and they go, I can't really reconcile that in my brain. That's just showing the distance, the parting of ways that has happened so far. Could you imagine saying to the Apostle Peter, oh, you converted, or the Apostle Paul, oh, you converted? No, I believe that I'm Jewish and Jesus is the promised Jewish Messiah.
You probably have a fight on your hands, I think, with Peter.
Exactly. So that's how far away we've come. And I'm hoping in our endeavors, with the Gesher podcast, and Steve and I do the Jew and Gentile podcast, that we can kind of begin to merge people back with, hey, God has a plan for Israel and the Jewish people, and you are part of that plan as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and we see that in the Jewish community as well. When they hear about a Jewish person who believes Jesus is the Messiah, there's that how could this possibly be? And we even noticed that in some of the coverage actually about Yaron and Sarah, trying to identify, are they Christian Zionists? Are they Jewish? The term Messianic, it all gets thrown around. I want to close with this, Chris. You have in your article this line that I just thought was perfect. You say, for Bible-believing Christians, standing against anti-Semitism should not be controversial. It should be instinctive. I love that. It should be instinctive. It's not for most believers. So I know at the Friends of Israel, we want to help people make that instinctive. What are some steps that a believer can take? So they see the anti-Semitism, they hate the anti-Semitism, but what do they do to be better informed and to actually take actionable steps to fighting anti-Semitism from a biblical perspective?
Ty, you and I work for a minister with the Friends of Israel Gospel Ministry, and we have amazing equipping ministries that people can go to right now called foiequip.org. If they go there, they can sign up for classes online for free, and they can watch expert teachers teach about the importance of Israel and the Jewish people today to fight anti-Semitism. Cameron, our colleague, recently invited George Richfeld, who's a Holocaust survivor, to tell his story to several hundred people online. If you want to learn more about Jewish culture, customs, Israel and prophecy, the importance of Israel today, if you want to learn those things, go to foiequip.org. And the bigger step, though, is to get trained and equipped. And that's what we have. We have our Bridges program where you can actually, for free, a 9-week program, It only requires your time, and it's not that much time. You can get trained to know how, you can be equipped, I should say, to love the Jewish people. And that is the greatest step that you can take as a Bible-believing Christian, to take that step, because really it is grounded in the scriptures. Don't be arrogant against the branches. In fact, you should be praying for the branches. You should be showing support to the branches, and you should be praying that they themselves would be grafted back in to the tree as well. So ultimately, I think we have some amazing programs that you know about, Ty, and I know that you endorse, that our FOI Equip, our equipping ministries that equip Christians to love the Jewish people, and it's foiequip.org.
Chris, you and I were actually just we were talking with a friend of ours recently who lives not far from the site of this Jewish museum where these people were murdered, and he recently finished the program. He went through our training, and you could just tell he's come away with not only a better understanding, head knowledge-wise, but a passion for helping the Jewish people, especially in this time of need. So we've seen that in real time, how that impacts people. Well, Chris, I want to thank you for writing this article. I invite, again, listeners, and we'll have this in the show notes, the link, but read this article that Chris recently wrote for Harbinger's Daily. Follow Harbinger's Daily for more really good coverage of Israel, and please take part in some of our programs. Chris, thanks for joining me on Gesher today.
Ty, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Gesher, a ministry outreach production of FOI Equip, your free resource for learning and engaging with the scriptures from a Jewish perspective. To learn more, visit foiequip.org. And for more information about Ty, visit foi.org/Perry. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Shalom.